Welcome to the first edition of the CFB Nation State of Recruiting. My name is Brian Driscoll from Irish Breakdown, and I am here with John Garcia Jr., the host of State of Recruiting. And John, this is going to be a lot of fun, man. This is John Garcia Jr., the director of recruiting at SI All-American. His podcast is going to be all about recruiting, the state of recruiting on a weekly basis. It is going to cover so many different topics. It's going to be a weekly show. May even sprinkle in some commitment previews, some commitment breakdowns, and all types of things along the way. But you can expect to hear John on CFB Nation every single week talking about whatever the most important news in college football recruiting is. John, thanks for so much for being a part of the CFB Nation family. We are excited to get this rocking and rolling, man. Getting on the ground floor, the first person to sign with CFB Nation, man. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yes, sir, BD. Thank you for the invitation. And look, I got to say, it's nice to have this platform where we could kind of kick back, relax a little bit, and really just dig into what we want to talk about. And obviously, that is college football recruiting, the trends, the evals, the opinions, some predictions, as you said, leading up to signing day, building the SI99, everything in between, the flips, the decommitments, the teams that are red hot. I mean, talking all that at one time is going to be quite the fun ride for us. And it's going to launch right when the season starts. So it's perfect to do it at this time. And I couldn't be more excited to have a platform to just open up a little bit more. You know, we send in a whole lot of stuff to our editors, right? It got to be in advance. It gets read through and all that. And that's great. And I'm grateful. But this is the prize. This is the reward for what we do, to sit back and really just spew whatever comes to mind. We'll have some structure, but we're going to hang out at the same time. And I think that's what most college football fans would like to hear.
No question. And with recruiting being literally a 365 deal now, there's always something to talk about. And now there's offers going out to 25 and 26 kids, so it never ends. And John, speaking of the latest news and what's going on now, y'all dropped the SI99 last week. And what I love about SI99 is there's two rankings, one before the season, one before signing day. There's not 5 releases between the end of the season and the start of the season when kids have played a grand total of 0 games of football. So you put a lot of work into this. I'm very well aware of all the work you guys put in, going on the road, evaluating film from the season, going on the road during the season to see players in person, going to camps, going to workouts, doing your digging on kids' personalities and work ethics and all that kind of stuff, and put a lot into it. And voila, last week you guys dropped the first SI99 for the 2023 class.
Yeah, BD, big sigh of relief with that 99. It was a lot of work, and this year was unique in a lot of ways. Of course, we've got every year we have so much more available data, right? Different data points, whether it's about the personality, like you mentioned, their off-field habits, their academics. So many items come across our desk to sift through that it really elongates the process towards not only ranking the entire 99, but trying to figure out who's number one. And this year, that was such a tough sledding type of situation compared to years past. I mean, we were Travis Hunter pretty early last year. The year before, we were even earlier on Caleb Williams. And certainly before that, Bryce Young, et cetera. This year was not like that. We did not have this clear number one guy from, January or February. This was up until the real tail end of the summer months. And then we settled, of course, on Dante Moore, the quarterback from Detroit, Michigan. This is something we feel really good about, but the road there was not an easy one. There were a lot of legitimate number one candidates: Cormani McClain, Keon Keeley, Arch Manning, Nico Iamaleava, Malachi Nelson. This thing was a wider pool than we ever really considered. And I think it's got the makings because of that of a really, really great recruiting class. This class of 2023 is one kind of for the books already, certainly from a drama standpoint or a coverage standpoint, but also from a talent standpoint. I think we're going to be talking about this class for a long time. So excited about the 99, but best believe that thing's going to change and flip a little bit once we get to January. But that's where the fun is.
Well, and that's the thing, John, I was going to kind of go to next is I think this could be the year where there's the most movement from 1 to 25. Last year was kind of, you had your top 10 and top 15, and there was some movement. Guys emerged. Some guys maybe didn't quite do as well as their senior years. But because of the depth of this class, where, we're talking about guys at 25, 30, 35 that you could make a case for being top 10. That's
Yes.
just how deep this class was. So, you had the summer camps, the fall evaluations of seeing these kids in games and then getting into the all-star games. But more so with you guys, it's time to really dive into the film of their senior years. I'm going to make a prediction now, John. I think the postseason SI99 is going to look a lot different than the preseason SI99. And that's what I think is going to make this 2023 class really fun and exciting to watch, is because there's so many good players. There's going to be some positions that break out that maybe we weren't thinking were strong going in. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the quarterback shake up. And we'll get into the strengths of this class. And of course, quarterback is going to be a big part of this as we move forward. But this is going to be this is when it gets really fun. You've got your SI99. Now it's time to get back to doing what I know you love to do, which is, okay, it's time to watch some film, time to watch some football, and really see who lives up to what our expectations were going into the season.
And it's really important to bring up because this is a preseason ranking, right? So you've done 3 years of varsity ball for most of these guys. You've given your final stretch of off-season camps, combines, 7-ons, all that fun stuff. But now it's about your senior year. This is the apex of the evaluation. And I think our industry, there's been such a chase for, let's have the first rankings or the earliest rankings or the earliest to identify prospect X, right? Which is great, but that has diluted some of the importance of, hey, this is about rising up to your senior season. It's like when you watch the NFL draft, they're talking about the year that just finished in college football, not 2 or 3 years ago, barring, injury or just some freaky athletic talent like a Derek Stingley. For the most part, they're talking about the season that just wrapped up. Hey, Mac Jones played his way into the first round.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're talking about. So for us, that's kind of how we view it. The senior season is that last sample where you should take another step forward. We saw a lot of guys take steps forward from sophomore year to junior year. Can you do it again as a senior, maybe with some fame, maybe with some money in some states where NIL is legal at the high school level? Certainly with more notoriety. You've made a commitment, right? Are you taking a step back? Or are you doubling down and saying, yeah, this is just the next step? I haven't made it. I haven't arrived just yet. So that's why we value so much of what these kids do as seniors. And yeah, I agree with you. There's going to be a lot more changes to the 99 this year compared to last year. I looked it up. We made 7 changes last year. 7 guys who weren't in the preseason 99 made the post. I think that number is going to be easily double digits this time around already. There's already some that I'm like, maybe he should have been in there, right? So once we get into the season, a lot of those assumptions will become confirmation and we'll start shuffling the deck from there. But yeah, we put a huge onus on that senior season, just like most colleges do, by the way. So I do think that's a great point to bring up, and how maybe we're structured a little bit different and how we operate. But yeah, we want to give you the realist list with the latest sample in mind, not a 4-year body of work. It's not a participation trophy. It's about the best kids leading up to, their freshman year of college, which is, it sounds simple, but it's gotten away from that in the industry by a large degree.
There's obviously a lot of differences with the SI99 with certain players compared to other industries and other outlets. And this is not a question, is not an attempt to show why yours is better or theirs is not good or taking shots at anybody. It's more of because you've worked at other places. It's more of kind of to give I want to give people an insight into sort of what is in your head as far as you do things a little differently at SI99, at SL American, in regard to this is what we're emphasizing with our rankings. And so a lot of it, they talk about the NFL projection and all this other kind of stuff, but your focus is more on what kind of college football players are these guys going to be?
Again, it sounds simple, but yes, it's not uniform across the industry. And I think that's really important in the message you're sending to your audience, right? In our case, it's college football fans across the country. We want to tell you these are the best incoming 99 players in the country for your college or your rival or whoever, right? So that's really the simplicity of our evaluation process. So we are projecting for college success. Certain guys fit certain systems better in college and not so much in the NFL. There are countless examples of that. And we're not going to shy away from those guys. We want to lift those guys up because that's where the passion is. We cover college football. We love college football. So that's where we're going to point that arrow of projection. And what comes with that on our end are guys who are ready to do it earlier. It's not a 3 or 4 year kind of projection where we're not saying, hey, in 2026, these are the 99 best players in the country. Like, no, we'd rather tell you about the 99 best underclassmen in the next year and a half, with the current 99 that we put out. So it's really about high floor players who are closer to ready to go than the raw, young, underdeveloped prospect. Doesn't mean those guys don't play their way in, because a freak's a freak, and Samuel Mpemba's got to be high up there, right?
Nicholas Harbor, right?
Yeah,
it's another one. Ashley Williams,
those,
right?
Especially at premium position.
How do you balance that, John? Like, as you go through the process of like Jaden Rashada, I think is a perfect example for that guy.
Yeah,
you have Jaden Rashada ranked really high. He's not a high floor guy, but you ranked him high, and it's not sort of out of line with your evaluation process and thought process, but sometimes the ceiling is so high that it bumps the whole thing up. And so how do you balance that when you're talking about really getting down to the nitty-gritty of putting this 99 together and where guys are going to be? How do you balance that floor versus ceiling? Again, the focus being not on who may be a top 10 NFL draft pick in 4 years, but who could develop into a college All-American? Because again, the job of people doing this should be to project what they're going to be in college, not to the level beyond the next level.
Right. Yeah. I'm not a scientist, so that's very hard to do that far in advance. That's a great question, though, because, yeah, obviously high floor guys, Dante Moore, Arch Manning, Brandon Ennis, those guys are going to be way up there, and they are. But yeah, there's the Jaden Rashada. There's, Nicholas Harbor, as you mentioned. There's some Cormani McClain, number 2 overall. That if the ceiling is just so darn high, you can't ignore that, right? Especially when it's athletically and at a premium position, like the guys we're talking about: pass rushers, corners, quarterbacks, offensive tackles. But there also has to be this counter, Brian. There has to be this body of work, at least for 1 year, on varsity against good competition, where you do see things come together. For Jaden Rashada, the COVID year, he got his feet wet and started a few games and showed some signs. But then in 2021, he really took a step forward from a production standpoint. So he felt better about that projection than most, because, yeah, it's about the ceiling with him, the arm talent, just how smooth he is with the football, pushing the ball to the third level, all those things. But we also saw this really strong body of work start to come together as a junior. And I think the same can be said for a lot of these other low floor, higher ceiling prospects that are in the top 10. I mean, Cormani McClain, don't ask him to play cloud in terms of his coverage, but 19 interceptions over the last 2 years tells me a lot about where his game is and where it will be, kind of simultaneously.
John, there's another interesting aspect to how you put a ranking together, which I think in the preseason ranking can make this a little bit interesting and intriguing. Is there is a projection to where is a kid going? And this is important because a kid's skill set is what it is. And not every young man makes a decision to go to a place that is good at producing players of that position. Or they may say, hey, look, this kid's you may project the kid as more of like a 3-4 edge, or a stand-up viper type of position, or edge, elephant, however people call it. But then he goes to a school that doesn't really have that, or he's going to go to a 4-down team that wants him to put his hand in the ground, or like you said, Cormani McClain, you say don't put him cloud, but then he commits to a school, and he hasn't yet, where that is what they're going to ask him to do. So explain why it's important to have where a kid is going as sort of part of the evaluation process as you project these players to the next level.
Another differentiator for us, and an important one, because it's really reporting 101 at the end of the day, right? We are journalists. We are here to project information and depth to our audience. And I think to ignore a very, very big data point, which a college commitment and where you're going to play, obviously that's a huge data point. To ignore that altogether, which is another kind of industry standard, I think is naive. It's a little bit selfish even. I think we can say, hey, we don't have all the answers, but all these data points come together to provide a better answer than the one we had before we got all this information. And I think, yeah, the school where you're going relative to the position and your skill set, I mean, that's got to say a lot. Do you feel better about Nico Iamaleava going to Tennessee versus Oregon on the surface level?
Well, that's
Something
an
like that.
argument that I've made, John. I told you before when this whole thing started, like I'm not real high on Nico. To be honest with you, I've got some concerns about his long delivery and some of the other aspects of his game. But then he commits to Tennessee, and I'm like, okay, I just saw what Josh Heupel did with Hendon Hooker, who was a very similar type of concerns coming out of high school. Tall, skinny kid, raw, needs a lot of work. Well, I just saw what he did with him. I saw what he did with Dylan Gabriel at UCF, and you're like, okay, he's going to a system that knows how to coach that kind of kid. Where if he was going to Stanford and David Shaw, who likes a different type of quarterback, I don't know if I would be as high on him in the ranking. So I think that's a really interesting aspect. And Nico, to me, more than any other quarterback, is the epitome of how that pick really, to me, elevates my projection for him to the next level.
Yeah. And I think, again, it's selfish to ignore that because you're saying Nick Saban's evaluation and Dabo's and whoever, I'm above that, right? I don't need that to help filter where my rankings might go. So it's a no-brainer for us, to be honest.
So, John, you talked about the back and forth that you had, and really it was almost kind of like I felt like as we were talking and I was picking your brain about where the rankings were going to be, I kind of felt like we were leading up to the NFL draft, back when it was like Eli Manning and Phillip Rivers and Ben Roethlisberger. We've got all these great quarterbacks, and you're like, well, who's going number one? Or even a couple years ago, yeah, obviously you have those years where it's like there's just a lot of great guys who's gonna kind of separate themselves. You settled in on not only Dante Moore from Detroit Martin Luther King High School being the number one quarterback, which is an accomplishment in itself in this class, but then also the number one player in the country. So talk to me, number one. We'll dive into Dante's game here in a minute, but just what was it that kind of led you, and what was the process like that led you to saying, okay, of all the kids we could go with, and there are plenty that were in the conversation, Dante Moore's the guy that we got to put number one?
Well, I think at the end of the day, his last 12 months at that position were the best in the country. And I think at that metric, it was by quite the margin. Whether you go to the 2021 season, 40-3 touchdown interception ratio, 3,000 yards, 70% completions, all the boxes you want checked, and a state championship, of course, by the way. We saw so much more improvement in his game. The processing was faster. The risk taking was greater, though it did not translate to a lot of turnovers. And we saw more functional athleticism from him on tape as well. And then after the season, he follows it up with an unbelievable 7-on kind of camp circuit where every time we saw him about 4 or 5 times this offseason, he was just better. By the time we got to June, he goes to Vegas and outthrows Nico and Malachi and Jaden Rashada, all at the same event. And then a couple weeks later goes to the Elite 11 finals, and for us kind of runs away with the thing. Nothing we expected this cycle because of the depth at quarterback. Now, Nico and Arch Manning didn't go to the finals, so that is a bit of a caveat. But really, Dante was not going to be denied over those first few days in particular, where he was just far and away the best quarterback on hand from an accuracy standpoint. And then it became from like a consistent velocity standpoint, which is really one of the pseudo knocks on Dante's game, right? He's a shorter intermediate guy, controlled, high floor, accurate passer. But then we're seeing him uncork some stuff, and it looks totally different. And now we've got some answers to the few questions we had on Dante. So at every step of the way, he answered the bell. Competitive, the demeanor never changed, quietly confident. So all the stuff off the field, kind of galvanizing leader type of personality as well, that you also want at that position, those were checked and of course vetted and confirmed independently thereafter. So really in the last 12 months, he had the best run. But then you go before that, he went to another state championship. He grew physically every year, and the production at that position grew every single year. And maybe what the last thing that, if I had any doubt, the last thing that put me over the top is I was talking to his head coach a couple weeks before we were ready to go with the number one call. And I asked him about like memorable moments where he realized Dante was going to be one of these special players. Both situations he brought up, Brian, were losses. One was his first start. They're playing a big time team out of state. I forget the team off the top. Apologies. And he's just getting beat up as a freshman. But he just kept getting up, and he ended up going like on the game tying drive late in the game. And he said that was the first time that I was kind of like, okay, now I kind of get it. And then another example was a state title game where Dante was like blow for blow, or excuse me, it was a game against Carmel, Indiana, where it was a Hail Mary beat him. But before that point, Dante went like crazy, 450 yards, balls outside the numbers, down the field, just kind of the stuff that they didn't really ask him to do. He put the team on his back and helped them get in position to win a shootout that, of course, ended in a Hail Mary. And it was at that point where he was just like, this is the best quarterback in the country. And he said other coaches came up to tell him about that as well. So those were two losing scenarios, which I think is for Tyrone Spencer, the head coach at King, says a lot about him as a head coach, but I think it says obviously a lot about Dante as well. When you don't point to the Elite 11 or something that's so easily tangible, hey, Michigan offered him in 7th grade, let's point to that. No, he pointed to 2 losses. So I think it tells you a lot about kind of Dante, the kid, the quarterback, not the thrower or the guy calling the plays in the huddle, but the football player and the person and the leader, which is those kind of benefit of the doubt moments that really help push somebody over the top. So all things considered, when you put the full body of work together, we felt most comfortable with him, especially with what we talked about earlier, the high floor stuff. I mean, that is the bread and butter. Our QB1 last year was Cade Klubnik, the highest floor quarterback in the class. And right now we think Dante is that guy in 2023.
So we're not going to dive into like a full film analysis of Dante. This isn't what that show is about, but just, for people who maybe haven't seen a lot of Dante Moore, what are the things that as you break down the film and you look at his game, you say, okay, these are the things that make Dante physically, right? There's the mental stuff, the leadership, the toughness that you talked about, but got to be able to spin it, right? What are the things you see that in Dante as a player on film at the camps and make you say, okay, in a year loaded with top elite quarterbacks, this is the guy that we're going to hang our reputations on and say he's number one?
Well, you're seeing it here on the convenient video sample, Mr. Production there. It's polish. There's polish all over the place when you look at Dante Moore, whether it's the footwork in the pocket, manipulating and getting outside the pocket, but always square, willing to take that hit, all that toughness we talked about, but he's always square towards his target. The timing and anticipation is always on. And then as you get to his junior tape, which I believe this is, the ball placement just starts to get better. He's throwing guys open before they break at the top of the route. He's just kind of in full control of his game, while he's, again, physically gotten bigger too, because he was, I think, 85 pounds or so during this tape. Now he's over 200 pounds. So he's continuing to physically mature throughout all of this. But the polish, the accuracy, the timing really stand out. The decision-making, which really is the fundamental of the quarterback position. You are the point guard out there. You set the table. All of that stuff really off the charts. And then when you get into the physical, not only the functional athleticism we talked about, but the delivery is concise. It's condensed. It's quick. The trigger can get from A to B really, really fast. And as he gets bigger, we're going to only see that strength become more of a strength. So I just think Dante, from a pure foundational element of what quarterbacking is supposed to be, is a scheme versatile, high floor prospect who's going to go out there and win you a ton of games at the next level. I really don't see a scenario where he doesn't come in, compete early, and then, rattle off, 25, 30 wins before he's all said and done at the next level.
So, John, obviously, a quarterback in today's era has to be able to play from structure, and all the things you talked about really fit well to playing within structure. I think the thing that really impresses me too about Dante is he also, for a kid who has the clean mechanics, the clean, it's like this kid's been taught how to throw a football. Like he's got really clean footwork, really clean mechanics, consistent delivery, consistent release point. But he's also a kid that has shown he can play when he's got to go off script. How, if you want to use that word, I like to use the word street ball. Like, can you change your arm angle? Can you make a pass as you're getting hit, as you're getting, throwing down and you're throwing across your body? He's shown ability to do that type of stuff too, which I think in a modern offense can really be the thing that separates you from the other quarterbacks, because you don't necessarily need that at Oregon when you're playing Arizona or Cal or Stanford. But to beat USC, to beat some of the teams that are going to be on the schedule moving forward, to get to the postseason, get victories, try and take Oregon to the next level, those are things you're going to have to do in those big moments. And that's something he's also shown an ability to do, I think.
Yeah, and it's probably the most underrated element of his game. He's known as this pocket passer, accurate, all that stuff. But yeah, nobody really talks about his ability when things do break down, whether it's a defensive lineman in his face or truly working outside the pocket. And I think that's another thing we kind of wanted to ask questions about in this process. And we found out that he's been running with the track team in practice for 3 years. They don't let him compete in the meets. So just little things you find out when you're digging in on these kids that really kind of help push a narrative over the top. Because it's great to look at the strengths like you talked about, but when you're splitting the hairs for the number one guy, it's like, okay, what are these weaknesses or perceived areas for improvement? And are they truly that? That's really the next step there, as opposed to just saying, oh, yeah, he can't move. He's not a great athlete. So he's just this pocket guy who has to go to a pro style Stanford, Michigan type of offense. Not necessarily the case here when you dig a little bit deeper. And like you said, you see countless samples of him making work when things aren't perfect throughout that 2021 tape. So again, those boxes are checked if you look deeper or dig deeper in a classic reporter sense. We happen to do both. And again, it just kind of reinforced the narrative that this is probably our safest bet for the number one pick in the preseason. We'll see how it develops. And there's, again, a lot of great candidates. But going into the season, especially with the last 12 months, apexing at the right time, we felt like it was truly, Dante Moore at the top and then everybody else.
John, there is one prospect in this class that I think is the most polarizing in the country in this class, and that is quarterback Arch Manning, who is from obviously Bishop Isidore. Was it actually Isidore Newman? Correct, excuse me,
Yep.
from Louisiana, son of Cooper Manning, who is the brother of Eli, and Peyton Manning, son of Archie Manning. And, there's a lot of debate about him, and people like to have really bad hot takes on Arch, right? And you've got some people like, oh, he's number one player in the country. And I was like, oh, I don't think so. And then there's the ridiculous hot takes. Oh, he's not that. If his name wasn't Manning, he wouldn't even be a top 100 player. Somebody even had the audacity to say something as silly as, he's a 3-star kid. And I'm like, okay, now we're just being ridiculous, right? But there is sort of an in-between on Arch Manning. And I know he's a guy that you guys had some trouble saying, okay, where exactly do you place Arch? And, respecting the game, but then also not trying to buy into some of the hype in either direction. So, and just talk to me about what the process was like of evaluating Arch, especially since he's not on the summer circuit where you can see him spinning the ball next to these other guys. What's his body type compared to them? How's the ball come out of his hand compared to these guys? How does he handle the heat? We had you on at Irish Breakdown talking about CJ Carr in the event he was at Nashville, how hot it was, and guys are puking and sweating, and CJ's just dropping dimes, right?
Yeah.
You get to see those type of things. You didn't get to see that with Arch. So just kind of talk about the scenario of where you saw Arch, how you evaluated him, and then also how you settled in on him at number 10. Because I know there's some thoughts of maybe having him higher. There's some thoughts of maybe having him lower. So Arch Manning, how did you handle the conundrum that is evaluating and ranking Arch Manning?
Yeah, the most famous, high school football recruit in the modern era already is going to bring a whole lot of scrutiny and eventually, too much praise and then too many haters on the back end. Nothing none of which is his fault, obviously, that goes without saying. But yeah, this was a hard one. There's really no other way to begin that part of the conversation. Of course, on the front end, this is, taking the legacy stuff out because that's obvious, right? And look, that does give you some benefit of the doubt. We talked about data points. All things even, you do trust the bloodlines, the legacy at that position, and the people that are going to be and are around him. In the high floor department, that does
Right.
carry some weight. So let's not use that as a reason to knock him. Let's actually use that as a reason to lift him up.
That's I want to can we focus on that just for a second, because
Yeah,
I like that you said that. I haven't heard anybody say it like that before. People shouldn't knock him because he's a Manning. If anything, I think it's something that you look at and say, okay, there's a level of confidence there. The genes, the bloodline, so to speak. Grandfather, uncles, all great quarterbacks, Hall of Fame quarterbacks. But you also know this is a young man that's lived in the spotlight his whole life, right? He has lived in the Manning. He's going to the same high school that Eli and Arch and his dad went to, and he's still been able to kind of stay above it all, and he's not a guy that's on Twitter all the time and announcing his commitment on ESPN and all the things I mean, look, if anybody could have done the whole, driving up in a limousine to his commitment thing like Jimmy Clausen did back in 2007, Arch Manning is that kid that could have done that, but he's not that. So I like the fact that you did point to the fact that his last name is something that we should say, well, if there's any kind of pedigree or any kind of lineage that we can follow and say that family knows how to produce great quarterbacks, it is the Manning family. And so that's not something that should be held against Arch, which some people on the opposite end of maybe pumping him up too high because of his last name, because of maybe it's more of the clickbait related ranking. Also, people that bang him for it. That's definitely not something that should be held against him for as a prospect.
100%. And I feel for him in that regard. But yeah, I think it should give you benefit of the doubt with him. Not all the benefit of the doubt,
Mhm.
but it should give you some, at least at the surface level. And again, in the high floor department, that's a pretty big box to check on our end. But if you remove yourself from that part of it, there's still a really nice body of work here. This is a 3-year varsity starter, deep playoff runs each year. Yes, it's private school ball in Louisiana. It is not, the inner city New Orleans ball. We understand all of that, but the production has still increased. The winning has still been, very, very common under Arch Manning there at Newman High School. And then physically, he has made some strides. He was always tall and lanky. Obviously, again, we know the family build there, not known as the most filled out muscular bunch, but he's starting to come around in that regard. And that was really the first indicator for me. I think he played at about 190 last year. A lot of us watched him on TV. The Berkeley Prep game was one of the bigger games of the TV version of the high school season. And at times he looked pretty good, but running away from Keon Keeley is not fun for everyone. And at times he looked pretty humble athletically in that regard. So coming out off of some of the full game evals we did last year, we said, I wonder if he can get a little bit bigger. And then, of course, as you mentioned, he doesn't do all the Elite 11 and Nike and all that stuff. So you got to go see him. So we did go over to Newman High. And when we're introduced to Arch, it's like I'm looking at Andrew Luck. He's 6'4", 225. And I'm like, this isn't the kid I saw at running around against Berkeley Prep trying to get a dub. This is a bigger, more mature kid. And yeah, we start backtracking there, and you're like, okay, what happened here? Well, he realized that athletically he wasn't where he wanted to be, physically, durability wise, he wasn't where he wanted to be. So he started to make a change. Again, these are all very good signs. So then you start to pair it with the traits we do see from a quarterbacking standpoint. And look, the footwork is excellent. The pocket presence is really good. Ironically enough, the mechanics aren't the best. He throws a good ball and has plenty of power, but he's got a kind of a condensed, a little bit funky motion relative to what you would expect. Again, if you bought into the whole Manning and the name thing. So I actually thought he had work to do mechanically. And so we've seen a little bit of stride from his junior year to this offseason in the limited sample that we've actually seen with him spinning it. And another benefit of the doubt item for Arch for us was they're going to open up that offense. So there's a little bit of projection in there. They're going to allow him to control a lot more of this offense. They're going to go more up tempo, more spread, because they're not as equipped up front as they were over the last few years. So the success of Isidore Newman is going to have a lot to do with Arch Manning, which is what you want. If you're going to play private school ball, put it all on that guy and let him have the opportunity to truly dominate. Think Cam Newton at Auburn, even going to the high school levels. Think of Caleb Williams a couple years ago at Gonzaga in DC. Travis Hunter, the number one from last year at Collins Hill, doing it on both sides of the ball in the Atlanta area. Go dominate in your system or as it expands. So I think Arch is going to have a lot of ahead of him for that. So because of all that, we were like you said, somewhere in the middle where he was in contention for number one, but there were probably too many questions from a competition standpoint, from a mechanical standpoint, for us to give him that nod. But the foundation, the floor is obviously sky high. The increased build, I thought, was a huge marker for him in terms of stacking him up with some of these other top quarterbacks in the class. So you throw that in with the expanding offense, and we kind of gave him some clout in that regard there as well. So he comes in at QB 5 and in the top 10 overall for us. So it's really a back and forth with all these guys. I think the quarterback he's most similar to is actually Dante Moore. So I do think that there's some interesting high floor conversation between those two, but either way, we were going to get crap for it no matter what. We did. We're moving on. It was tough, and it'll probably get tougher this year for Arch. There's really no way around that.
I just love how ranking a guy 10th is somehow an insult. I mean, it is what it is. But he is ranked number 1 by Rivals, On3, 247, and then number 2 overall by ESPN.
Yeah, so we're the lowest in the world on Arch Manning at number 10 overall.
I had him lower than that, but I'll say the one thing that I do feel works in his advantage is I think making the decision to go play for Steve Sarkisian at Texas was the best decision I think he could make just from a football standpoint. I can't get into all the other reasons why he might have picked Texas, but just looking at it from a football standpoint, I don't know if there was a better pick for him out there than going to Texas. I think you're talking about someone who has a system that is going to really he's going to thrive in. It's a system that doesn't require a huge arm. Mac Jones doesn't have a huge arm. And he mastered that offense in a way that we haven't seen anyone other than Joe Burrow master an offense in the last 10 years. And he's going to be surrounded by really good players. So I thought, and he's going to get out of the Southeast, the SEC where his uncle and dad and both uncles and dad played and his grandfather played. He's kind of, actually, he's going to still be in the SEC.
They're going to go there, yeah.
He's getting out of the Southeast region. He's going to be playing in the Southwest at Texas. So for me, that was something that bumped him up a little bit in my ranking because I like you, I think that you have to be able to evaluate where a kid is going if you're going to project how he's going to do at the next level. So I did like the decision for him to go to play for Sarkisian. I think that's going to be a really good fit, fit for him.
That said a lot about him too, right? It could have been so easy to go to Georgia, Bama, or even follow the uncles, right? Tennessee or Ole Miss. And then you play into that and you're kind of the savior no matter what. But Texas, that takes a lot of what in this regard, because that's been one of those teams that we kind of, I don't want to say laugh at, but laugh at. Yeah, that's kind of one of those.
Good for a while.
Are you back or are you just saying it? I think until Georgia won this year, they were kind of in that boat, right? It was like, you haven't been good in a very long time, or elite number 1 good in a very long time. So I do think it takes a lot of maturity to make the decision that he did, especially with all that scrutiny. And like you said, there's more benefit of the doubt in how he's handled the process as well. He just committed with a tweet. It was his first tweet ever. I think he just said, "Hey, I'm committed to Texas, #hook'em" or something like that. And that was kind of it. I like that. I like that. I think he's going to be businesslike, although everyone around him says he just wants to be a kid. And that's probably true, but he knows what is expected of him and that he'll basically never be able to meet those expectations. So even to have a chance to come close, he's going to really have to handle things from a business-like manner from the jump. And I think he's already shown a lot of that. So I'm rooting for him. I'd love to see him take a big step as a senior and make it that much harder for us to rank him after the season. And that's kind of what I'm expecting. I do think he's going to play his way into our number one conversation again.
John, one of the fascinating things of following recruiting, and I've followed recruiting a long time, even before I started getting into this business, I was always a big fan of looking at the rankings and watching film and doing all that stuff. And I'm a little bit older than you, not too much, but a little bit older than you. So I still remember breaking down film on VHS. And, when the internet first started, it was impossible to get this film. Now there's so much more film available. And one of the things you get a chance to see as you look at the various classes over the years is every year there's different strengths. Some years, oh wow, this is a loaded running back class. Sometimes you're like, I don't know if there's these running backs deserve to be in the top 100. So every class is going to be different. A couple of years last year, okay quarterback class, not 2018 tremendous quarterback class. We see it in different years. So as you evaluate this 2023 class, not just the SI99, but just in general, what are the positions to you that really stand out as if you want to get a big time player at this position, this is the year to do it?
Yeah, I think quarterback goes without saying. You kind of hinted at it there. We've talked about it for most of the show. It's a great year at the position. We had, I think, 11 QBs in the 99. It could have been more easily. It's a really great year at the top. Not only the debate for number one, but with great fits thereafter, right? Chris Vizina to Clemson is a really nice fit, developmental down the line kind of thing. He's not even getting talked about as one of the guys in this class. So I think there's a lot of great depth at quarterback. Austin Novosad to Baylor, great fit on and off the field. And the list kind of goes on and on. That goes without saying. But really, the two positions that even more than quarterback in terms of volume and depth, it's wide receiver and defensive end or edge, right? We'll talk edge mostly as we talk about the modern game. Those two spots, Brian, really, again, dominated the conversation. We could have put 45 of those guys into the 99. We didn't. I think the number was still like 34. It was 17 and 17. But we could have pushed 40, 50 just with those two positions because it is that loaded in this class. So naturally, the debate for the number one, even 2, 3, 4, 5 at those positions was really, really hard to break down because there is so much, not only high-end talent, but variance.
Yes.
And I think that's the key, especially, talking to wide receiver. We rank slot receivers at SI as well. So the Brandon Ennis versus Zachariah Branch conversation as maybe wide receiver one for us was really tough. They both ended up number one because Branch is the number one slot. But, man, a lot of contention in the top of that group. But because these guys are different, right? Brandon Ennis is your John Mechie. He's 3rd and 6, reliable, high floor, excellent route runner, tough, physical, great after the catch, competitive, all these things. And then Branch is just juice. He is wheels, route running, explosiveness, give him the ball anywhere, and he could take it the distance. So you're talking about almost a floor versus a ceiling guy right there at that number one overall at one position. So once you get into that skill set variance, it gets really interesting. Then at receiver, you get a whole lot of size variance too, right? At edge, it's a little bit more conventional, but at receiver, you get a lot of size variance. You got, 6'4" Tyler Williams from Lakeland, Florida. And then you've got, Eugene Wilson from just down the road in Tampa at, 5'9", 5'10", but absolute wheels. And they're ranked around the same nationally, but they're so different. They couldn't be more different. So I think that's what's fun about the evolution of not only the types of receivers we get, but the premium that we're really evaluating them with top to bottom. I mean, they're getting the biggest contracts in the NFL. They're going top 10 in the draft. Devontae Smith just won the Heisman 2 years ago. That position, if we start to expand the premium position numbers, that's probably the position that's next up. And it's because of some of this high-end talent and variance conversation that we're seeing in this class of 23. And then edge kind of goes without saying. You got to get after the passer. It's 2022. It is the most essential thing to do defensively. So naturally, a lot of these players that came up playing all these different positions are just kind of getting filtered down towards that edge spot to get after the passer. And this group is one of the best that we've scouted in a very long time, led by, of course, Keon Keeley, the Notre Dame commitment, who everybody still wants. So that'll be a storyline, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
We talk about once or twice, but it's a great year at edge. And there's some variance there too. I think there's a lot of different types, but obviously body type wise, there's a lot more similarities compared to the wideouts.
I think that's the interesting thing is, you look at a guy like him and then Damon Wilson and then the Rasal kid from Alabama. There's just so much difference in the type of edge players in this class. There's the guy that's more of a pure, just a big 6'6", long, rangy guy like Keon. I think Damon Wilson isn't quite as long as Keon, but very similar type of game, long, athletic, twitchy. And then there's the guys that are more built on power and maybe like an off ball type of edge, like a Malik Bryant, who could, be a 3-4 outside linebacker in certain defenses, that kind of thing. So I think that variance is interesting, John. And I think that's an interesting part of this class too. And you were talking to me about this before the show. There's some really interesting kids in this class. I mean, you're talking about Nicholas Harbor is a kid that you could recruit for probably 5 different positions, and he projects as a star at all of them. Samuel Mpemba, Notre Dame's recruiting him as kind of rover will linebacker. Other teams look him as an edge rusher. Some teams at the beginning were looking him as a tight end.
Yeah.
Ronan Hannafin was a guy that his final 3 schools was Notre Dame, Alabama, and Clemson. Notre Dame and Clemson were recruiting him as a wide receiver. Alabama was recruiting him to play linebacker, where Christian Harris played last year. How many kids can say that they're pursued by those programs for completely different sides of the ball? We're not talking like slot versus boundary receiver.
Right.
We're talking about offense versus defense. Darren Gillette is an athletic linebacker that some teams like as an off-ball guy. Other teams like him as an edge. Oh, and by the way, he had 1,400 yards receiving last year in high school. Jackson Howard, when the process began, was one of the best tight ends in the class. Now he's in your SI99 as a defensive end. I think this is a really fascinating class from that regard, that there's just some guys that you're like, I don't know where this guy is going to play. And I'm sure that has to make it difficult when you talk about floors, fit, and all those type of things that you're like, I don't even know where this kid is going to play, but here's what I know. Wherever they end up with him, that kid's going to be really, really good.
Yes. And I think that obviously is what it's about in that overall ranking. The positional rankings are great, but really that's where that overall ranking comes in, because that's where you really see, hey, I don't care where he projects. This is where we think he's going to be overall. And obviously there's a lot of small numbers next to some of these guys that we've been talking about. And I think the position projection part of this is important too. We kind of make our call, but yeah, a lot of these college programs are on the fence just like we are. And I think that's a beautiful thing, right? These kids are not only showing a certain skill set that may project at another, but they're also growing. And then they're, some of them are just freakazoids. I mean, Nicholas Harbor is running 10-2 at 240 pounds. I mean, it is, what in the world? This is not something we see, every day. So I think it's a fun conversation. And that's why we really went against the grain with a lot of these. We've got Quay Rusal as an off-ball backer. Again, we've seen him in person since he was a freshman, and now he's like 6'2 and a half, 240, and just rocked up. I mean, he looks like he's an NFL backer right now. So he's most valuable as an edge prospect. But now when you put together his build and the volume that he plays with from a tackling perspective, you say, well, maybe he's a Rashaan Evans. Maybe he's a guy who has some edge ability, but you're going to move, to that Mike Backer spot or even play some Sam, depending on the down distance of personnel that you're going up against, because he can do all of those things so very, very well. So there's a lot of position projections like that were a little off script for us. But again, the conversation to get to this point is really fun. And look, we can always switch it. We've got a lot of guys that are in between edge and interior defensive linemen, like a Jason Moore or Peter Woods. And then you've got some other guys who are, between corner. We rank nickels as well. So we've got some corner nickel safety hybrids that really can go either way. So it's really fun to see, physically how these guys progress as well, because sometimes the question just gets answered for us. Like, oh, this guy was 240 when we first evaluated him. Now he's 275. Well, we could slap an interior lineman tag on him, but it's certainly not always that simple, but it's fun nonetheless.
When you follow recruiting, John, one of the fascinating things, so what I do, obviously, for what we do at Irish Breakdown is, we kind of look at where all the kids are ranked, and just to provide context to our readers about it. And this has been one of the weirdest years when you look at the variance and rankings. Look at Micah Bell, for example, the Notre Dame commit, who is, you guys have at SI99, you have him ranked 89th overall. He's also a top 100 player, according to ESPN. He's a top 100 player by 247 Sports. And yet, On three has him as a 3-star recruit that's not even in the top 50 in the state of Texas. You know, you look at another player that you have ranked high, Colton Vasek, from another Texas kid who you have ranked, you know, in your SI99. He checks in at number 85 overall. 247 Sports doesn't even have him in their top 247. On three has him ranked number 202. So it's a really fascinating year, which means there's going to be kids that because you guys don't look at other people's rankings. You're just focused on the film and what you evaluate. So of course there's going to be some kids that kind of jump up into the SI99 that then when you step back and look at, okay, well, where do these guys have them? Which I think is a fun process after the fact. So, you know what? Like, we got this guy a lot higher. So let's talk about some of the guys that you really liked in this class that you either have higher than other people by a little bit or maybe by most, or some guys that are just like, you know, just blow away like where everybody else has them. So let's talk about some of your favorite recruits in this class, John, that people may view as like sleepers or guys that other people don't value as much as SI All-American does.
Well, you talked about Darian Gillette earlier, and man, we could have a whole show based on this kid. You mentioned the production on offense as well as defense. That's something we love really at any position. But when you talk about, you know, projecting that towards an edge or off-ball linebacker spot where you could get some of those hybrid opportunities, that was a no-brainer for us. I mean, that's a top 50 kid off rip. There's not a whole lot of conversation that needs to go into it. He is more athletic than you, despite being bigger and stronger than you as well. I mean, that is something that is really hard, especially in the state of Texas, to see in one singular athlete. And that's probably a whole nother theme of this class, is some of these really freaky, out of this world athletic types that could stand on their own in any class, and that yet they're all seemingly in this class of 2023. So he's certainly one as a clear top 50 prospect that I was surprised to learn wasn't unanimous after releasing the 99 for sure. I think maybe our biggest variance is Caden Lee, the receiver from Georgia, who
consensus 3-star recruit, by the way.
Man, that's, you know, I used to be in the star game, so I'm not going to knock it, but that's tough. When, again, we talked about receivers increasing in importance across the sport, right? It's the next premium position if we start expanding that list. Not that we'll talk much expansion on this podcast, by the way. But if we start expanding that list, receivers really that next spot. Everybody understands that it's more important. And outside of Brandon Ennis, I know I've talked to you about this. Outside of Brandon Ennis, who's wide receiver 1, by the way, and not just by us, which we've come to find out. Outside of him, I think Caden Lee is the most reliable route running and hands catcher in the entire class. How could that not be something that is valued across the board? This is a kid who understands zone coverage. He is one of the better route runners, period, in the class. And then again, he really maximizes his 6 foot, 185 pounds, whatever is his frame, and really can go pluck the football out of the air, which is something that we really relegate towards boundary or conventional wide receivers. But when you can do that in the slot, now you have increased red zone value. You have increased third down value. I mean, and that's what the game is about. That tells me you've got great awareness and body control on top of the technical polish that you show as a great route runner who can run, by the way. It's not like he's a slow player. It's just not the first element you talk about when you're discussing his game.
You have 2 Auburn commits also ranked a lot higher than a lot of other people. Jeremiah Cobb and Ashley Williams. Jeremiah Cobb is a running back out of Alabama. The highest ranking for him is number 148 by Rivals. Everybody else has him outside of the 200. And Ashley Williams, it's an even greater transparency. And these are 2 kids that you and I both talked about as you were putting the rankings together about, I don't know what I'm missing relative to everybody else, but this is a kid that this kid's a top 100 football player. So talk to me about what you saw in these 2 Auburn kids, Jeremiah Cobb and Ashley Williams, that made you say, hey, these are guys that are among the best players in college in high school football, projecting to the next level, no matter what else maybe some other people might think about them.
Well, I think both guys, first of all, benefit from their positions. It's the year of the edge. We've talked about it. And physically, there are not 5 edges that you would line up ahead of Ashley Williams from a height weight standpoint. 6'5", 6'6", 240 pounds, but yet he plays like he's much smaller. Look at the leverage and bend he's playing with at that size. That is very hard to do up at Zachary High School in Louisiana, another state title team, by the way. I love state title winners. That is one of I love those little data points there in the end. And then, it's apparent he's the alpha on this defensive line, yet through a lot of double teams, which we've already seen on tape here, he is still like the first guy off the ball and the guy making the play at the contact point, whether it's sacking the passer or getting in on TFLs. I think he had over 30, TFL sack combination stats coming out of last year. I mean, the production is there too. And then he's got this frame that he's going to increase. He's going to, whether he stays as an edge or as one of these guys we move, to interior defensive line down the line because he's 265, he brings some extra juice. And then look at him breaking on the ball in coverage. I mean, it's like, what? You don't expect that stuff. There's the number, 36 stops behind the line of scrimmage. You don't expect that mobility and movement skill from a player his size. So he's one I wasn't aware of 12 months ago. I think he committed to Nebraska late in the spring. And I'm like, look at Nebraska going down to Louisiana. And then I watched the tape and I was like, are you kidding? Mm-hmm. I'm like, this kid's not going to Nebraska. No disrespect, Scott Frost. This kid, the Louisiana kid who can do this, he's got SEC written all over him. And obviously that's how it turned out. But there's just so much to like about Ashley Williams that he's one kind of like Caden Lee, where I'm like, I don't get it. I've only been doing this 12 years, but I'm like, I don't, what else do you need to see from a player at that position with that kind of production to move him up? I don't get it.
The interesting thing is with Caden Lee, I kind of, you and I talk, I view him as kind of in the middle of the two. I don't have him in my top 100, but I definitely don't see a 3-star kid. I kind of have him in the middle. And the reason I say is I don't know if the ceiling is there for Caden Lee, right? So, because you love the floor, which makes sense. I would argue that if we're talking about ceiling for Ashley Williams, we're talking about a top 50 guy.
Yeah, we might have him too low.
Right. Well, exactly. You have him at 88. So that's where I struggle with Ashley Williams is even if you're someone who David Hicks, for example, we could have a conversation about, David Hicks is where he is because of the floor, because the day he steps on campus, he's at least going to be a good football player. But then you're like, how good is he really going to be? You understand why people miss on those guys. To watch this kid and people think he's not a top 250 football player, much less top 100, it really is a bit of a head scratcher and makes you wonder, like, what exactly are they looking at, and what would his ranking be if he maybe would have committed to Alabama instead of Auburn? I think that's kind of the thing when I look at it. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think the same thing about Jeremiah Cobb. And I've watched this film a lot just to be like, okay, what am I missing here? Because when I see him, I see a kid that's got some legitimate talent to be an SEC running back. No matter what system he plays in, he's a really good football player, especially for a modern running back, because he's a guy that can run between the tackles and get outside and catch the ball and do all that kind of stuff.
And then you hit it right there. If this was the 2012 rankings, wouldn't be in the top 100. He'd be a nice player.
We'd be projecting him to corner,
or that, right? Or this is a strong safety projection, which we'll never see again. But yeah, that's the other part of it. It's good. That's actually a great point. You've got to work on those evaluations that you've always felt are important, but you've got to expand. It's like doctors have to go to continuing education to continue to stay up on the medical field, and I'm not associating what we do to that level of importance, but there is a continuing educational element here, and it's called football. It's luckily for us, it's right in front of us. We only have to watch on the weekends to figure out, okay, like these are the new things. Like, RPO, we weren't talking about this 7 years ago. You've got to play the modern game, and I think he's a great example of this. Not only is he, first of all, well put together, 5'11", about 205 or so. He could really run in a straight line, which is a great modern trait and kind of a high floor conversation piece. But when he works outside and in space, he hits another level. He's got the vision, he's got the burst, and he's got some subtle moves. It's not the swiftest thing we've ever seen.
Very efficient, very efficient runner.
Yeah. And then what you do, again, it's a well-rounded evaluation. So what do we see this offseason? Multiple camps where he is making good linebackers, including a few in the 99, by the way, nearly fall down because of the routes and the speed that he's putting on them in one-on-one situations. And he can finish around the football thereafter. So I like the 3-down modern ability of Jeremiah Cobb as opposed to the conventional 25 carries a game, workhorse type of guy. He is not that, but he can do everything you need from a 3-down perspective in today's college football. So when you talk about the best, that's what you want to see. You want to see the Bijan Robinson type of player who can hurt you no matter the down, the distance, where he's lined up, the play call, all of those things. Those are the game breakers, and those are the SI99 candidates for me, because they can make you look really smart at the end of the day. And he's a kid that I'd bank on for that. Great system. Again, another guy who started since he was a freshman. If you can't follow it by now, that's something I really like in my high floor evaluations. And he keeps getting better every single year. That's another really big indicator for continued success. So yeah, I'm really bullish on Jeremiah Cobb. I actually like this Auburn class. It's just very small. It's a very small class, but they're doing a good job with the guys they land. They just need to do more of it.
I have a feeling we're going to have a show at some point in time during the season of who was going to try to pick at the Auburn class. Because there are some guys in there that you're like, you know what? Like, let's make a run at this guy with all the stuff swirling around Brian Harsin. Like, we need a running back. There's a pretty good one down there. Need an edge rusher? I got a guy for you. It's going to make this very fascinating. So, John, that is going to do it for episode number 1 of the State of Recruiting. Make sure that you subscribe to CFB Nation on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We will continue to expand the different podcast platforms that we will be available. Of course, you can also sign up, subscribe to our channel on YouTube for further shows. We are going to do this once a week at least. There will be several weeks where maybe we do a little bit more, so you definitely want to stay locked into this. You can obviously, John will give you his Twitter address here in a minute, so you can follow his work there as well. But this is going to be a fun year because I think this is the perfect year, John, to jump into the podcast form, because there is going to be so much change and breakouts. And, this guy we loved, but he's not having a great season. Or this class is like, where'd this school come from? You're seeing programs like Notre Dame and Miami and Tennessee starting to ascend up the rankings, and, new coaches and new places and flipping. This is going to be a fascinating year to follow recruiting. And it's always fun to follow recruiting, but this year I think it's going to be especially fascinating. And of course, we'll start talking more and more about 2024 at some point in time. So you're going to definitely want to stay locked into everything that we've got going on at CFB Nation, but especially on John's State of the Recruiting podcast. So make sure that you are on the lookout for that on our next edition.
Yes, sir. BD, thanks for having me. State of Recruiting. Let's start talking about it, and let's get a dialogue going. I love to hear from the audience what you guys think. We're always open to tweaks and open conversations. Just be a little nice in the process.
John, let them know where they can find you on Twitter.
Real simple, John Garcia _JR.